What do we know about factory farming or intensive farming? It actually is something that is so easy to understand. Can you imagine, when you're a kid and you're showing this book and it's an old McDonald's farm and you're looking at, the pictures of the green, lush valleys and, the cows meandering around and there's happy faces on them. You can't do the alternative. You can't show an intensive farm. I mean, people would go insane. They would implode with the information. It's not like you could have school tours through an intensive farm. The reason that we know about intensive farming is because individuals last decade and the decade before realised something was seriously wrong and they infiltrated the intensive farms and they actually took imagery and they showed it to people, and a bit like Greenpeace. So it's that same kind of activism that's created this awareness, but it's completely closed down now. You'd have no chance of getting into an intensive farming facility. There's no way that you'd be able to get into one. I actually spoke with a lady that ran an ethically outdoor bred pig farm in the west of Victoria, and she, even though that they're raising their animals in an incredibly ethical, extremely sustainable way, even she won't allow people through. I mean, I was different, I was buying from her, but she said it's so people still see animals together in a space and they immediately react. So she's got a really decent, sustainable farm. I can't imagine how I would feel walking into a farm where, there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of chickens in there, and you'd be able to see the degradation of that animal. We know for a fact that chickens in particular are fed growth hormone so that their size increases at a far more rapid rate than they would do normally. We're aware of that, and yet it's a bitter pill to swallow because we want to eat the chicken. So it is an easy thing to turn your back on, but it's not advertised either. I mean, it's just not something that we're aware of. Even feedlots for beef cattle, if you drive around, you won't see many beef cattle on the hillsides, and that's because they're in feedlots. And those feedlots are hidden from us. Not so much in the States, you can see them quite clearly, but in Australia they're hidden behind bushes. So if you get some drones and things, you can actually go over the top of the edge and you can actually see the feedlots there with the cattle in there. And I've seen feedlots and they are appalling. They are very, very, very confronting, and that's why most people don't know about it. They're not advertised, and it's very confronting. It's very hard to look at. Don't want to see an intensive farm. And we just don't have farm tours anymore. School children don't go to see farms anymore because they don't, in the traditional sense, exist. When somebody creates an extraordinary farm, and there are quite a few of them around, some of them particularly in the States, then they open their doors willingly and let people in to have a look at it and to see what a sustainable farm looks like. There are documentaries on it. But that's why we don't know. There's such a big divide. We cannot see in that supermarket shelf what's behind that. You think about what the consumer actually sees. So when you walk into a supermarket, you've got your range of beef, and they're all beautifully wrapped. And an eye fillet or something like that will cost you $70 a kilo these days. I mean, it's an expensive piece of meat, and it's beautifully presented. And that's what you're seeing. In a restaurant, you will actually have a marbling rate. And that's the amount of marbled fat in the actual meat itself And the more the marbling is, the tenderer and the more tasty the meat is, because it's got fat, and that's what the taste is all about. But so that's what we see. But to create that marbling, you have to feed the cattle in a feedlot grain. That's the way that they create that particular product. So again, it's like the animal doesn't count. At the end of the day, it's not what is right for the animal. It's how they can present it and how they can sell it to the end consumer. And it's just not something that you think about. I don't imagine many people would sit down to a piece of steak in a Michelin star restaurant and say, oh gee, I wonder what kind of life this animal led. It's just not something that you think about. But chances are, if you've got a highly marbled piece of meat, it's lived in a feedlot. And chances are it's lived in a feedlot anyway. So it's that huge divide that the consumers have with the farming community. It's a massive gap. So when we talk about people in that whole food chain system that should know that it's wrong, that the whole system is broken and that it's wrong, they would have to know that. They might go home and pretend that nothing has happened. But if it's so okay to do what they're doing, then why don't they let us go in and see them? Because they know fully well that most people would be appalled. They would be absolutely appalled. And the beef industry, particularly in Australia, is a massive industry. It's massive. So to try and change that kind of industry would take a lot of consumer firepower. And the industry's not going to give the consumers that firepower, because obviously it would change the way that they have to farm. And so they hide it. If they've got nothing to worry about, why hide it? And as I said, it's the people that have come before us that have made us aware of this problem. And that's why we have such a massive turnaround, particularly in chicken and in eggs, because there are people that have infiltrated these systems and said, this is what a chicken, this is the life of a chicken. It's not right. And they were able to do it to such a degree that the consumer could then get on board and say, you're right, actually, it's not right. Let's change this system. And the system is changing. Maybe not as fast as we'd like, but it is changing. But they're not doing the same with the feedlot cattle. I think a lot of people still believe that cattle are grazing on the hilltops, but they're not. They're not grazing on the hilltops. They might start their life as grass-fed, but they will end their life in a feedlot. And cows can get crippled in feedlots. They really can. It might sound like it's, terribly exploitative, what I'm saying, but this is the reality. These cows are being fed mass amounts of grain so that they can fatten up and get this wonderful marbling for people to eat, but they can be crippled in the process. Now, no one farmer or otherwise is going to show you that. Why? There's no way that the average consumer would accept that and turn away and say that that's not happening. Best just not to show it. And sometimes I have to say, it's easier for the consumer not to see.